My name is Oluwaseun Ismaila, and today's case is going to be on an introduction to Kanban. So this is the agenda for today. I'm going to analyze what's wrong with the current system, the history of Kanban, what is Kanban, why Kanban, and Kanban practices. So there are several project management methodologies, project management methodologies. We have waterfall and we have agile. So Kanban falls under one of the agile project management methodologies. Now, what's wrong with the current system? The current methodology is being employed by most tech companies, results in the following: burnout. Developers are overwhelmed with way too many tasks, and eventually they end up being burnout, and this is not productive in the long run. There's frequent bugs on production, complaints about productivity, low throughput. Low throughput means that the rate at which tasks are being completed is not as fast as it's supposed to be. Leads to vague sprint planning, too much work stuffed into one sprint, and unidentified bottlenecks. You can think of this as some of the issues wrong with Scrum. Now, the term Kanban is gotten from the two terms kan and ban, which are actually Japanese terms for basically signboard. Now, the history of Kanban. Kanban was developed by Taichi Kono at Toyota in the 1940s. It was designed after the shelf stocking techniques used by supermarkets, demand-controlled system where replenishment happen based on market conditions. It is based on a pull system rather than a push-based one. This means the way it happens is work is not the way tasks are being assigned. It's not such that it's being pushed from from left to right, or let's say bottom top, but it is rather being pulled from right, rather being pulled from left to right, but not pushed from left to right. That is when a task is completed by, let's say, a team of developers. Instead of the next task being pushed into their current work, their current list of tasks they're supposed to be working on. What happens is the developers are going to be the one to request for more tasks so that they don't get overwhelmed. Use of visual signs is also essential. Visual signs, for instance, Kanban boards are to be employed, um, storyboards, things like that. Now, what is Kanban? Kanban is a scheduling system used in manufacturing to help companies improve their production process. It is adopted by software companies for just-in-time delivery without burdening developers. The Kanban method for software dev was pioneered by David J. Anderson. Work in progress limited pool system, which exposes system problems to visualizations. It is in its simplest form. A Kanban system consists of a big board with story cards. And this, for instance, is a Kanban board. You have several columns here, which indicates a step in a stage in the development process, backlogs, to do, ongoing, and done, and then work in progress limits. For instance, at every point in time, the maximum number of tasks that are to be as that should be on that to do should not be more than two. Also, under ongoing, it should not be more than three in this case. And these are story cards. Board represents the state of the project at any time. Different from visualizations and implements work in progress limits. Work in progress limits such as these ones. It tries to limit the amount of work at any stage. Also, easy identification of bottlenecks in the system through visual boards, and it aims at minimizing waste states. Now, this is an example of a typical Kanban board. You have several tasks on pending with work in progress limits assigned to each stage. Under pending, we have six. I've at maximum number of tasks that should be on pending should be six at every point in time. Under analysis, there should be three. Under development, five. Under test, three. And under deploy, five. But why Kanban? Why should we use Kanban as opposed to other project management methodologies like Agile or extreme programming and the rest of them? The reason is that it helps in visualizing the system and it exposes problems early. It allows us to evaluate the impacts of process change. It allows us to identify bottlenecks and alleviate them. It allows us to establish trust in the process. It helps us to maintain a sustainable pace with sustainable throughput. Also, you need to relax as a developer, and Kanban advocates just that. Now we're going to analyze the Kanban practices. What are the typical things that you're expected to make use of if you are to be practicing Kanban in your organization, for instance? Visualize. Workflow is inherently invisible. Visualization is core to Kanban. You cannot really see how work is being done actually. This is why Kanban is this is one of where Kanban actually shines because you can actually visualize how your work is being done. Number of tasks that have been completed by your team. In a Kanban board, you can see by just a mere glance that, for instance, on this Kanban board here, we have about two tasks that have been completed and several others that are still in progress. It enables people to take a quick look at the state of the workflow, and also use of story cards can also be used. This is a story card, for instance. Development process is also divided into columns like this. Each task is specified on the story card. Every single task that is being assigned to your team has to be written on the story card. Essentially, cards move along the board to show workflow. Very easy. Moving your card from left to right means that task is progressing, and you can visualize your workflow that way. Limit work in progress. So apply limits on work in progress in each phase of your development. It is basis for implementing a pool-based system. Work is pulled into the next phase once capacity is available, and it improves quality by giving greater focus to fewer tasks and also reduces lead time for work by reducing the number of concerns for the developer. So work in progress actually has a lot of advantages when being employed or adopted in an organization. So it creates a pool-based system where it is when there's room in a particular stage in your workflow that new task is being added to your workflow. It's not that tasks are just being pulled and just being pushed and pushed to you as a developer. It is when you complete one task that another one is added, and that also ensures that throughput is steady and the developer does not also get overwhelmed. And because maximum utilization of resources is not desirable contrary to popular belief, it brings in slack into the system. Work in progress creates a more conducive work process. It gets the most important things done one by one with a clear focus. Things get done faster, better than before, leading to lesser work. So one of the things practices of Kanban is management, workflow management as well. Workflow should be closely monitored. Measurements must be made to identify problems in the system, and this can be done by making use of tools that I'm going to be pointing out in the next slides. Leads to better understanding of the system and helps in making educated improvements. Also, it helps to identify the positive and negative impacts of changes introduced into the system. If you monitor your workflow and you manage it as effectively as possible, you will know when things are going right or going wrong as new things are being introduced into the processes that are being employed by the company. Also, make policies explicit. All policies related to workflow management should be explicit. For instance, work in progress limits, basic workflow, rejection and acceptance flow, definition of doneness, and things like that. Also, it helps in providing a basis for process improvement based on statistics. It allows for a more rational approach to process improvement by logical reasoning. Getting started with Kanban. Things you need. Basically, what you need is a board, a lot of post-it notes, preferably of different colors to signify, maybe you can use to signify the urgency of or the importance of the task, and also lots of commitment as well. If you want to keep using Kanban, also, you need to understand some terms. For instance, in Kanban, lead time simply means time taken from request of a feature to its completion. Cycle time means time taken to finish the task. Throughput means essentially refers to productivity, defined as the amount of work delivered in a time frame. Work in progress limit value stream refers to essentially to your development process. Swarming means when the team comes together and collaborates to solve a problem. And the board, also the board should allow it allows easy visualization of the development process. Each column represents a phase in your existing development process. So this is an example. We are back up to the dev test out here. So this might vary by company or by organization, but it's just the same idea. Numbers on top represent work in progress limits. The number of tasks in each place is limited by the work in progress limits specified. Then you have your story card. So basically, your story card is where you document your task. It keeps track of features or tasks. It's more of an experience related feature. It includes information regarding transition of features on board. You can also use post-it notes if you don't want to print new story cards. Different colored post-it notes can be used for different issues. Maybe you can use maybe blue for bugs. You can use maybe red for bugs. You can use green for features, blue for tasks, and maybe yellow for improvements, things like that. Then you have your charts to measure the effectiveness of your system. You need to measure how well your team is doing, which is why you need to introduce charts into what you're doing as well. Measurement tools to measure charts are basically measurement tools to measure the effectiveness of the system. Every time a card is pushed or pulled on off the board, the chart changes. The charts change depending on that. Can be used to interpret various important metrics like average time taken for a task to be completed and so on and so forth. Can be used to identify the flow of work. It's also useful to identify the state of tasks in each phase of development. We have control charts and cumulative flow diagrams, which we can't really cover because this will take a lot of time. So here's an example of a control chart. Control charts are used to measure the average time taken for a task to be processed. Lead time, like I explained in the previous slides, and cycle time is represented on the control chart. So, simple charts can there are simple charts, they are the simplest charts that can be drawn, and the aim is to keep lead time and cycle time as low as possible to ensure that the time it takes to complete a task and to move to the next one is as short as possible. Then you have your cumulative flow diagrams. So what the cumulative flow diagrams does is they show the relative amount of work for each stage. These are colored areas for each phase for easy identification of bottlenecks. Vertical distance of the chart shows how many tasks are on the board and helps you set right work in progress limits. Horizontal distance allows you to monitor cycle time. Cumulative flow diagrams should run smoothly. Large steps or horizontal lines indicate problems in the flow. Variations in gap slash band indicate bottlenecks. When the band gets too wide, it indicates problem in work finishing or developers unable to handle the amount of work. So let's get started. You want to start implementing Kanban in your organization, and you already know the practices and what you need. You have your board, you have your post-it notes or your story cards, and you already have a list of your tasks. So you need to first identify your development process. How are features decided? Um, what are the various steps involved in materializing it? Then you need to define start and end points for the board. Identify your boundaries. Identify where the task enters the board. Identify the end of its life cycle on the board. Then you need to agree on certain things. Initial work in progress limits and policies. Now, these are subject to change maybe later in the future. If you see that throughput is not as good as you expected, you can change the work in progress limits until you strike a perfect balance. Prioritization and selection policies, policies for different classes of service, expedite, standard, fixed delivery date, and intangible and things like that. Then process review cycle time.